It happened. Something many of you have been asking for. There's now a Stories with Traction course. In this course, I show you how to properly set up a story bank, and I share strategic storytelling concepts to help you boost your sales, enhance your marketing, and position you to create a vibrant company culture. If you're interested, check out the link in the show notes. Now, on to the podcast. Persuading people to take the actions we want can be hard. Our teams and clients are bombarded with thousands of messages every single day. But there is a way for you to get above the noise. Stories. This is the Stories with Traction podcast, and I'm your host, Matt ZAUN. Join my guests and me as we unpack the power of storytelling. We'll talk about topics like leadership, sales, and marketing, all through the lens of strategic storytelling. Enjoy this episode. When I tell people that I speak professionally, it always prompts an interesting response. And a lot of people say it must be fascinating to share messages with audience all around the United States. And it is wild. But what really fascinates me is not me speaking, but me listening. I've had the opportunity now to speak in almost every US state to thousands of people, different backgrounds, different industries, and I've met and learned from some incredible leaders. Two things really stand out. One is intriguing to me, and one is horrifying. The thing that intrigues me is it doesn't matter who I'm talking with, even if the person is a CEO of a company of thousands of people, everyone that I've come into contact with has some form of an inferiority complex. So for anyone listening who feels inadequate in something in your life, just realize that everyone has some form of an inferiority that should give you hope. Now, what horrifies me? The more I connect with people one-on-one and they truly go deep and they start to lower their ego and be vulnerable, the more I realize how many people are living in a gray area. What do I mean by that? More people than ever before are looking shiny on the surface, but behind the scenes, they're suffering. It amazes me how many people are suffering in their marriages, at work, in their relationships. They're over drinking, they're overeating, they're engaged in behavior that is hurting them. That's why I have been anticipating this episode. Today, I'm joined by KARI SCHWEAR, who is the founder of GrayTonic. She's an incredible executive lifestyle coach and an amazing speaker and corporate trainer. Welcome to the show, KARI.
Oh, thank you so much, Matt. What a nice introduction and a nice descriptive of what the gray area is. So thank you for that.
Well, thanks for your time. I appreciate it. For anyone that thinks that I pick my guests willy-nilly, this has been on the calendar and scheduled for 4 months. I've been anticipating this conversation. So thank you. I appreciate you joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to dive into some content here and hopefully inspire those that are listening and give them some planted seed of hope and what they can do when they find themselves in the gray.
Well, let's start with that hope aspect, because I feel like a lot of leaders feel like they're on an island. They look great. Maybe they have large teams of people that are helping them. And maybe social media has pushed more of this into the world, where a lot of people, I think psychologists call it identity management, where people try to really manage their identities online, and then that carries into their personal life, where they always want to look shiny and happy, and behind the scenes more is going on. So to give us hope, can you just tell people that there are more people out there that are dealing with gray areas than they may think?
Oh my gosh. I think every human has some form of imposter syndrome lying inside of them, no matter how successful they get. And because I work with mostly male business owners that are very successful, they run 7-figure businesses. From the outside world, you described it. They are very successful. They drive the nice car. They have the beautiful home. They have a nice, beautiful wife or husband at home. They have the kids. They have all the status that society would say they're successful, but inside they may not be feeling that way. There's the less than or trying to prove themselves. They've worked so hard to build a business. And now on the inside, things are starting to not feel the same. It's feeling like they're crumbling silently. And then they might be doing some self-sabotaging addictive behaviors to deal with some of those stressors that they find in their life. And because they are so successful, they're not going to be sharing that with anyone. So they keep it inside. And then you're right. The identity piece is so tied to this. All of our behaviors are driven from our own identity. So what they actually believe, what you believe, what I believe about myself shows up in our behaviors every single day. And so because of that, someone who is highly successful needs to be very careful, treading water very carefully, and making sure that no one finds out how they're really feeling inside. So it takes so much energy to hide what they're really feeling. And that's the struggle that I like to work through with clients, because it's not a great place to be. They can't impact the way they want to impact. They can't work on the legacy that they've worked so hard at building. They're not going to be able to be present for their family, their kids, their team members, their colleagues. It requires so much energy to stay in the gray. Yeah.
So let's talk about this energy, because you're right. I mean, it's absurd what people do, the lengths that they go through to conceal what they're suffering with. But what's interesting to me is I almost feel like for someone to make a shift, there needs to be a massive destructive turning point. And it's so unfortunate, meaning, someone is radically over drinking, but it's not until they get that DUI and it shows up in some news piece somewhere that they get help, or they're engaged in some other destructive behavior, and it's almost like they need to get caught before they do anything. Does it need to be that way?
Absolutely not. And I think that's the thing. My story is I was a gray area drinker. And let me define what that is for the listener that may not have or ever heard that term. So a gray area drinker is someone who is in this wide spectrum of drinkers that it falls between socially drinking, and I mean the take it or leave it drinker, all the way to severely abusing alcohol where they need it to survive. So that leaves the mild and medium and into the severe categories of alcohol abuse disorder. So it's a wide spectrum of drinkers. It's estimated about 50% of those that consume alcohol may be in this gray area. So it affects more people than we even realize. And that's where I was. And so when someone finds themselves in those situations, unless they're forced, like you just said, a rock bottom that typically we hear like this happened, then they made a change. Most people don't have a rock bottom. Most gray area drinkers don't have a rock bottom. They don't need to have a rock bottom. They finally get to their own enough. And it's so personalized. It's so individually based on what is going on in that person's life and the situation that causes them to get to their place of enough. And for me, it was a conversation that I had with my 23-year-old son at that time. He's now older, but he was 23. I walked in of having a full day of drinking. It was a holiday. It was actually July 4th, 2016. He made some comments to me about, wow, Mom, you're really drunk and all the things. And I slewed back some unfavorable words that no mother should ever say to their kid. And he reminded me of what I said to him the very next day. And I was devastated. So that was my enough. That was my wake up call. So I think everyone has their own experience when they finally get sick and tired of being sick and tired, or they're tired of hiding. They're tired of playing the games with themselves. They're tired of the cognitive dissonance that's bouncing through their brain on a continual basis where they can't stand it anymore. They finally get to a place where they want to make the change. And that's where change can happen. It cannot happen before that. They have to get to that place of a strong desire, knowing their why, and then being committed to themselves.
Wow. All right. So that goes deep. So correct me if I'm wrong, but the why was you want it to be what? A better mother, a better connector to your children. What was the why behind the shift, the change?
Well, I looked at my son who, he's just out of college and maybe a couple years out of college at that point. And he was a heavy drinker coming out of college. He was in a fraternity and all the things that goes with that. And I realized that I was this role model for him. And my behavior was deplorable. and the things that I had said and the things that I was doing at that time. And I thought I was the average mom, the average person. I mean, everyone else drank. I would tell myself that because everyone around me did, and that's very common. We think it's very socially acceptable to drink excessively on the weekends. We have the excuse of the weekend coming up. We deserve it. We want to have time for ourselves and all the things that goes with that. And I just got on that train of it's acceptable. So for me, the why was I don't want to be this way as an example for either of my children, let alone myself. And I think that was the biggest piece for me personally was I looked the part, had a very successful job, live in a beautiful home, drive the nice car, got the great husband, all the things. But yet deep inside, Matt, I was not happy. And so that's when I really needed to start to make some of those changes. I knew it, I knew it secretly, and I kept it to myself. And carrying that burden was so much harder than just coming out and sharing with someone, even my husband, how I was really feeling. So I kept it inside. There was no way I could tell anybody how I was, what was really going on. So you said in the beginning something so important that I want to open back up, which is about being vulnerable, about being willing to share or speak to somebody when you are feeling that way. And the moment that you do, something happens. You release that grip and the fear, and the shining light that you think is so bright on you isn't. It's actually, it reflects outwardly, and that person that you're sharing it with, a close friend, a colleague, a relative, whatever, whoever it is, will see you for who you really are. And they're not going to judge you. They're going to accept what you're saying, and they're most likely going to support your decision and really support you in whatever it is that you're sharing. And that's the beautiful thing about being open and vulnerable. We start to move through it, and then we become actually stronger.
Wow. I appreciate you mentioning the leadership piece. Like, you truly wanted to be an incredible leader of your family that caused that transition. I mean, thankfully, something didn't happen destructive bodily, right? Like there wasn't a car accident. I mean, it could have been a lot worse. So thank God for that. So I do think a takeaway that I have is someone doesn't need an unbelievably destructive turning point to make that change. So I appreciate you mentioning that, even though what you said was destructive, it could have been a lot worse, right? So I'm glad that you were able to do what you did when you did it. My story is a little bit similar, kind of, as far as me making a shift regarding my relationship with alcohol. You mentioned 23. What's interesting, and what a lot of people listening probably won't believe, is I didn't have my first sip of alcohol until I was 23. The reason for that is I started wrestling when I was in elementary school, and I wrestled all the way through some college. And you basically, I would play football, so I would beef up, and then I would cut weight. So the thought of consuming alcohol and having to cut weight, I would wrestle at a very, very low weight, and half the battle was the scale. So the mere thought of going to a party, even in high school, and having to cut all that was horrifying to me. So I stayed away from alcohol, and no one gave me any kind of peer pressure because the wrestling team was glorified. So it was, Matt's not partying because he needs to make weight. And when I was 23, I had my first sip of wine, and I really like to dive into things. I have a somewhat of an obsessive personality. So I started going to different vineyards and understanding more about wine, which led to all kinds of different alcoholic beverages. But I learned pretty quick what alcohol can do. And then when COVID happened and the world was in peril, so to speak, in April of 2020, I had my first night of over drinking, and I was like, wow, is this what it feels like to have that euphoria, if you will, by drinking too much? And then that was what started kind of a path where it was over drinking. And then my pivot, my transition was the sleep deprivation, because I, believe it or not, even though I didn't have my first sip until I was 23, my level of alcohol, my intake, my alcoholic tolerance is off the charts. Have never experienced a hangover ever, which is not a good thing because it didn't teach, like I didn't have to deal with that. And what's amazing to me, though, is I realized the sheer lack of sleep I was having due to the amount of alcohol I was drinking. And from there, I remember, based on the inspiration that you've shared and our relationship over the years and things I've read that you put out, Kari, and I thank you very much for that. It allowed me to understand that there is places that I can go. I didn't understand what great drinking was. And I remember reaching out to you saying, hey, I'd like to get better sleep because alcohol was the main cause of my sleep deprivation.
Yeah.
So I appreciate what you do. And I just want everyone to realize that the gray area is a real thing. I would have considered myself in that category. And it's something that people really need to be cognizant of. Like, what kind of, even though it might not be massive destruction, I mean, sleep deprivation isn't good. It's not something that is good for my family, not good for my business. So it was good to make that change. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And you know what? The alcohol, listen, I'm not on a crusade against alcohol. It's always going to be prevalent in our life and around us in society. But my mission and my goal is just to bring the awareness of what it is and to plant that seed, to just pay attention, listen to those inner voices that we have inside, that we can really start to make sense. Why am I using it? How is this helping me? Because there's other ways to reward yourself or to relax or to escape from a rough day. There's a lot of tools that I have in my toolbox that I share with clients on how they can move through the day-to-day stress. And, alcohol is just one part of the symptom. It's just one part of a gray area. Another gray area that I see quite a lot, Matt, is in marriages, particularly as someone builds their success as a leader, they're so focused on their business and, again, becoming uber successful and tying their identity to their work, that then they forget about the family life, particularly their spouse at times. And that can really be very, very hard and difficult to maneuver when you don't have the support of your spouse on board with you. And this is another gray area that I personally went through. My husband and I have been married almost 34 years. And just after we celebrated our 30th year, we came to a head with our own marriage of, are we going to continue this? And it was devastating for both of us. And we worked really hard to work through that and rebuild our relationship, which is another huge gray area. And a lot of that had to do with his career. He had his head down all the time. Again, his identity was tied to his success and his head was down. He wasn't paying attention to what was going on at home. And this happens. You become withdrawn. You get in your own head about things and not sharing. The communication stops, not showing up for your kids, all the things. And that's very commonplace. So that's another area. And, people feel your energy as a leader, as someone who is responsible for family and team. It is a lot to handle knowing that you have that much responsibility on your shoulders, especially for men. We're already, society's shifting when it comes to masculinity, right? With things happening in our world today. But as a man that's trying to hold everything together for their family and their business, it's so much for them. And alcohol is one of those ways that's easy to escape with, as well as porn or emotionally eating and not taking care of themselves or looking elsewhere outside the marriage or, fill in the blank. There's all kinds of things that we do to cope with our stress.
Sure. So there's a lot to unpack with what you said. So first, congratulations on 34 years. That's absolutely amazing. My wife.
I got married when I was 12, by the way.
There you go.
Wondering.
That's awesome. Yes. No, that's amazing. So I'm coming up on 12 years and I'm excited about that. So 34, that's amazing. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that. One of the things I always recommend for people to do is go to nursing homes. So I get asked this question all the time. People always ask me, what books do you recommend on public speaking? Especially since I go out, I do a lot of talks. What books do you recommend on public speaking? Most books in public speaking are complete and utter garbage. I'll save everyone listening time. They can teach some mechanics. They don't teach you how to tie into your pain. In order for you to be unbelievably inspirational, you need to tap into a very, very deep level of pain. So I always recommend talk to homeless veterans, go into nursing homes and talk with people on their deathbeds and hear unbelievable regret right? So I really appreciate you mentioning the marriage piece, because if you go into nursing homes and you talk to people that they know their time is coming very soon for their passing, it's very rare that they talk about, I wish I spent more time at the office. I wish I was on social media scrolling more. It always has to do with relationships. They weren't there for their
110%.
children. They weren't there for their
Yep.
spouse. Unbelievable. So I highly recommend people do that. Another thing that I want to mention, because you mentioned the male piece, you mentioned, the shifting, the script has shifted, definitely, gender speaking as a society. I do want to make a point about that. And for women listening, I want people to recognize that this is really important for you as well. The shift, the script for women, as you know, radically shifted to you go girl, be
Mhm.
awesome in the corporate boardroom and be awesome at home, have everything that you want. And I'm not against that script. My wife is amazing. She's an incredible leader. She's a phenomenal business leader. I consider my wife an incredible mentor of mine. I've learned tons from her. But the script, the script for men has shifted, right? And it's causing massive confusion where men don't know what the script is. There's no playbook anymore for men. And
That's right.
I see more, people want to talk about toxic masculinity. I see more destructive elements when
Mhm.
it comes to men, that I think women should be concerned about it as well, because for us to function and have a healthy society, we need health across the board. And I do want to mention this, that I want to unpack with you. I, due to the spike in suicide in the
Mhm.
last few years, which has been absolutely horrifying, I
Yes.
was at an event, a local event. We've had a lot of suicides with local high schools in our area, unfortunately. And there was a local event, and hundreds of people showed up to this. So they were going to have a candlelit event. I don't know how many people they were expecting, but hundreds and hundreds of people showed up to this. They had speaker after speaker, talking about the life of all of these high schoolers that ended up killing themselves. There were 9 of them. Okay. So their
Boys.
friends got up. All of them were male.
Mhm.
Every single,
That
not a
doesn't surprise me.
single girl. Now,
Yeah.
I don't care who is listening to this, man, woman. This should horrify everyone, because that literally tears at the fabric of our society in many ways. So, what are your thoughts regarding that? Why is that? What do you think are some of the reasons behind that?
Well, I think, my age group, I'm in my middle 50s, and I think that the age groups have changed, the demographics have changed a little bit. And I think that we're trying to appeal to everyone. We're trying to make everyone feel inclusive. And I think that's important. I think we all have an important place in our life. But I also think the traditional roles of masculinity, especially for people closer to my age, and that's really who I speak to and work with anyway. There's this confusion, this mass confusion, even with that age, because they've been brought up to believe the man is the head of the household, and my age is when it started to shift slightly, that, women are now in the workplace, and just like your wife, I own my own business. I'm successful, all the things, right? We are pretty equal in our marriage in that aspect. But I look at my husband with reverence. He's still the man. He's still I look at him with honor. And I think sometimes that is missing. And I think for the middle-aged guys and up, it's very confusing. They're trying to figure out how they even fit in anymore. And the responsibility that has been put on their shoulders has shifted. And they're trying to be everything to everyone and still hold all of this together. And it's the pressure becomes too much. But to your point about teenage suicide with males, that is on the rise. And I'm connected with a few people that really specialize in suicide. And we've talked about this, especially with high schoolers and middle schoolers, and the trend that's happening with that. I blame a lot of that on social media and trying to keep up with the facade of looking good. Same thing. They're in the imposter syndrome zone too. It just looks different for their age group. But there's just a lot of pressure everywhere, Matt. Our world is changing, and more so than ever before, we need to really focus on what is most important. And that is being connected to something higher than yourself, whether that's God, creator, whatever. but also to really look inward and get honest with yourself and be the best that you can possibly be. And that is hard to do for a lot of people. They just don't want to do the work to do that. And that's what needs to happen in order for them to move through it, So the clients that I work with, I mean, I just got 2 beautiful testimonials this week from clients about my work reaches well beyond just working with that individual. It's a trickle down effect. I wrote a post recently about that myself, and just it is true. It's not just working with the individual. It's a trickle down effect for everyone in their life, their spouse, their kids, their teammates, and everything. It's the energy that they hold. So there's a lot riding on this. I think this is an important topic that needs to continue, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the most horrific conversations I think I had in the last couple of years was with a friend who basically ran a crisis center. And so he's a counselor, and then he started to run the center. And he shared with me things that are unbelievable. Like the sheer volume of people that they are seeing in the last couple of years has skyrocketed. And I said, well, what is like the biggest shift that you've seen? And he said the kind of people that are now coming in that no one would think are. So
Yes,
basically
exactly.
and basically in the last couple of years, there are more and more people coming in that no one would ever think they're dealing with any kind of opioid addiction or any kind of, alcohol addiction. You mentioned pornography, like all the different things that have skyrocketed in the last couple of years where people are really suffering and hurting. And, he's counseling some of these people that are unbelievably successful human beings. And I don't think enough people realize it. And again, they feel like they're on an island all to themselves. So someone that's in that category, whether they want to admit that they may be in the gray area, maybe they already realize that there's something destructive, what do they do? What's the first step? What would you recommend if someone somewhat knows, at least they're willing to admit there's some type of issue that they're dealing with? What's the first thing that they should do that you would recommend?
Yeah, the very first thing is not run away from the feelings. It's okay for us not to feel okay. And this is the reason why we act by choosing alcohol or overeating or pornography or whatever. We're trying to escape or run from a feeling. We've never been taught how to sit with our feelings as children and teenagers and growing up. It's very rare for a child to, be okay with not being okay and having that temper tantrum. We need to be okay to talk through how we feel. Our feelings is what drives our actions. So be uncomfortable is an okay place to be. So that's the first thing, is to not always feel like you have to act upon your feelings. I have a quick little saying, which is stop and pause and reflect before you act. And if you just give yourself that 1 minute time out, just to stop and look at what you're thinking about, notice how you're feeling, and ask yourself some questions like, why am I feeling this way? What are the thoughts that I'm really having about this? Are they really true? Could there be something else that is true? Taking a couple deep breaths through this time is really important, and redirecting to something that's going to better serve you. Just taking that time out for yourself is huge. The second thing I'd say is, if you already think that there's a problem with something that you're doing, even those inner thoughts is, could I be drinking too much? Could I be doing X too much? And you think it's a problem, it's probably a problem. So the fact that you're even asking yourself those questions is an indicator that you want to pay attention to what is going on the inner side of yourself. What is that inner voice that is speaking to you? And listen to it. Stop shoving it under the covers. It's only going to be able to stay there, but for so long. And our nervous system gets overtaxed. A lot of the things that we feel, we push down, especially men. Men are just notorious of this. They keep pushing down their feelings. They don't want to share. They don't want to open up. They don't want to be vulnerable. I got it. I can handle it. Most men are control freaks. I got it. It's the ego thing coming out. And eventually, your nervous system will break down, and you will either explode, erupt, fall apart, or cause some catastrophe in your life. Eventually, you will be forced to make a change if you don't do it while you have the opportunity. Being in a gray area is a choice. Let me say that again. Being in a gray area is a choice. You still have the choice that you can make to get out of the gray, whatever it is that's going on, before you're forced to make a decision. That's the beautiful thing about being in the gray areas. You still have that option.
Wow. So that should be inspiration for people that if they're in the gray, get help now. Start the process of figuring this out before the eruption happens. So I appreciate you mentioning that. One of the things that's amazing to me, I've learned so much about leadership just by being a parent. As you know, there's a lot of emotions that come with that. And there's a big turning point for me. This was really profound to me, is during holiday break. So I have 3 young kids, 3 very young children. And as I'm sure you can imagine, you have a few weeks during the holiday where I always want to keep them preoccupied and go, 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 and activity after activity after activity. And you just, at some point, you can't keep up, right? You're putting so many activities in front of them. And I remember my kids coming to me and they continued to say, we're bored, we're bored, we're bored. And in my mind, I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, I have back to back to back to back activities. And it's like they get from one thing to another, to another, to another, trying to keep them active. And at one point I just looked at them and I said, it's okay to be bored sometimes.
Yeah. I love that, Matt.
And I shared that with my mentor a week later. And I said, Matt, he said, it's okay for you to be angry sometimes. It's okay for you to be frightened. Like he was shoving it almost back in my face, because as adults, especially as a male, you mentioned the fixing. When I'm tired, right, I get frustrated. I want to fix it. I should be doing this. I should be doing that. When I'm angry, when I'm dealing with something, it's like, this is not okay. I need to fix it. And he was basically pushing it back in my face. Okay, it's okay for your kids to be bored. It's also okay for you to not feel okay, Matt. Right? And that was just so profound to me. Is we should also listen to what we're saying to our children, and also allowing and giving them space to understand their feelings. Because you're right, a lot of kids were not allowed; they were not given the space to do that. So I appreciate you mentioning that.
Yeah. One other quick thing is as leaders, as really successful leaders, what I find most often is there is this tremendous amount of incongruency going on inside, where again, this goes back to imposter syndrome, but they're looked upon as being this high leader who has this amazing, couple hundred employee team running a 35 to $100 million business, and things are cranking and everything looks great on paper, but they know inside that they don't really feel that way. So that incongruency, this rubbing the sandpaper kind of feeling inside of their soul, is what's causing a lot of this. And again, you mentioned it, it's about being okay with not being okay. Just recently this week, I had a client say to me, I'm just neutral. I'm just neutral. And as if it's like not a great place to be. I'm just neutral. And I'm thinking, no, neutral is good. Let's capitalize on the fact that it's neutral and you're not in this downward spiral, what I call a protective state. Let's celebrate neutral. We don't always have to be on this high every single day. The expectations that we have to be, operating at this level 10, 24/7 is just, it's not going to happen. It's infallible. It's not realistic. We are going to ebb and flow through our day and our states throughout the day. We're going to go in and out of protective state and an expansive state, just because we're human and because we have all these emotions. So a lot of it, what comes down to, we just need to give ourselves some grace. We're human. It's okay. We're supposed to have all these emotions and feelings. And it's okay to have an anger fit. Just do it by yourself and with a pillow. Right? It's like scream into a pillow. I love boxing bag, like the big hanging boxing bags. If someone has access to put that near their house or their workplace or their, inside their space that they work at, and you're just frustrated with something, go hit the damn bag. That's the best thing you can do. Just get out your aggression. Don't keep it inside. Your nervous system cannot handle if you keep shoving stuff down. You got to be able to expel it, and in a very healthy way. And that's the key.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning the nervous system going into the brain function. The neutral piece, here's something that's very concerning to me that I think is not being talked about enough. I really like sharing this because I think it's very helpful, is the idea of what we've done as a society as it pertains to dopamine. And I don't think a lot
Mm,
of people really
yeah.
focus on that, is that when you, even if you go, like go into a movie theater today and watch a movie compared to 50 years ago, right? It's like the spike in dopamine that you experience by watching some type of, like, just an action movie today, or even social media. It's like everything with it's graphically, visually appealing, and what we've done now as a society is it's dopamine hit after dopamine hit. And I always recommend the book Dopamine Nation to as
Nation.
many
Yeah.
people as possible. Anna
Good book.
Lamke, she is a psychiatrist from Stanford University. Phenomenal book, tough book to read. But Dopamine Nation talks about the pain balance, right? So you have this spike in dopamine, it's a pleasure, and then you have a crash. So it's this
Mhm.
seesaw, if you will, of pleasure pain. And it's just, when you said the neutral piece, that's what I thought of, because we're like training our brains, we're so overstimulated that
Mhm.
just like being now is like neutral, and it's like it's okay.
Yeah,
It's okay.
exactly.
It's okay. And I think we're missing out on other pleasurable experiences in life because we're artificially inflating our dopamine. One of the things that's been amazing about travel that I do is I get to go and see some gorgeous mountains and be out in nature because I'm in all these different
Mm,
states. And it's like it's so actually beautiful. It's not beautiful on a screen like it's some like Instagram polished picture. It's like, no, I'm literally staring at a mountain right now, and I could just sit and be, and it's okay to just be in that neutral
yes.
state, right? I mean, it's
Yes.
amazing. You've talked
Just
about that
enjoy.
before about
Yeah.
nature, right? I remember you
Mhm.
saying, you going and connecting in nature and trying to figure out like next steps. That was really important to you. I remember you saying that.
Yeah. You know what? This is, and I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things that I did recently at a workshop was I took, these are all CEOs of large companies, successful businesses, and I took them outside to a courtyard and I said, take off your shoes and socks. And they're like, pardon me?
That's
And I
awesome.
said, yes, we're going to take off your shoes and socks. We're going to do something known as grounding, which is to get our feet on the earth and in the grass and the soil and really feel the earth beneath us. But scientifically, there's a reason why this works. There's magnesium in the earth, and years ago there was more magnesium in the earth than there is today, but it literally can recharge us. So there's something really cool about going barefoot, but even more so just being present. We just stood in the grass, kind of leaned back and forth with our toes while we did some breathing exercises, and just being present and being quiet can make all the difference in the world. So if anybody's, that's one of my little tools in the toolbox is get outside, take your shoes and socks off, walk in the grass, especially as
Interesting.
spring is coming, get with nature. Another hack, by the way, is people travel across country. The fastest way to acclimate yourself to the current time zone there is to ground, to get your shoes off, go to a beach if you can, if there is water. If not, just go in the grass, and just acclimating yourself to that time zone is this is the best way to do it, is through grounding. And there's so many papers on this. I'm not making this up. You can read
Interesting.
about it. Yeah, it's called earthing or grounding. There's plenty of articles out there, scientific data
Huh.
proving this point. But yeah, it's one of those little hacks that maybe the average person doesn't know about. But there's so many things that we can do to benefit ourselves that can really help our nervous system, that we can self-regulate without needing to pour a drink, without needing to look elsewhere outside of our marriage, without viewing porn. We can find things that are going to satisfy us and help us move out of that protective state and into an expansive state if we just give ourselves the opportunity and we know the know-how, and to partner with somebody. This is much easier when you do it with someone by your side that is going to help you see the blind spots and help you really open up and be vulnerable and be willing to share and have that courage. And that's when someone begins to really expand in their life.
Wow. 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 Powerful stuff. Thank you. I appreciate you sharing all of this. I very much appreciate your time and what you do. I got a lot out of this conversation, and I know a lot of people listening probably got a lot of takeaways as well. There's three in particular that really stood out to me. I really appreciate what you said regarding what you believe about yourself shows up every day. That's really important. I think there's a lot of leaders there that haven't truly unpacked their trauma, where maybe they had some type of childhood trauma and that comes out with their team, right? It's different elements of what they believe about themselves that shows up. And you basically mentioned it takes a lot more energy to hide that. So I appreciate that. The second thing I got was it's better to figure out how to get out of the gray area now. And it's okay to not have a massively destructive turning point. People don't need to get a DUI or go to prison or do something crazy before they have that turning point. They can make that turning point now. I appreciate that. And then also just the fact that you mentioned it's okay not to be okay. I do think that it's becoming more acceptable to buy into that philosophy, but I appreciate what you said after that. You said the fact that someone may even be asking themselves, is this a problem? It's probably a problem. So I appreciate that. So those are my three biggest takeaways. So I appreciate it. I appreciate your time. KARI, if people want to learn more about what you do, maybe they want to get in contact with you, where's the best place that they can go to get that information?
Yeah, the best place is on my website at graytonic.com. It's GRAYTONIC. And I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. That's how you and I met, Matt, on LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. I think it's probably the best social platform out there. And, you know, it's a real community that is formed on there and with real people. And I think, yeah, it's the best platform out there. A big shout to LinkedIn. So
that's awesome.
Find me on LinkedIn. The beautiful thing is I'm the only KARI Schweaer on all of social media and Google. So it makes it super easy to find me.
Amazing. All right. So to make it super convenient for people, I will include that in the show notes. People could just click and check out your stuff. So thank you again, KARI. I very much appreciate your time today.
Thank you for having me, Matt.
Thank you for listening to the Stories with Traction podcast. Please leave a review, since positive reviews will make it easier for others to find this conversation. Next episode will launch on Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern. Until then, remember, if you want to persuade with power and inspire those around you to action, you must share more stories.